Hello, my name is Mark Rubio, and this is my literary autobiography. First book on my list is Oh, the Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss. This is the first book on my list because it's probably one of the first books I read. And I read it when I was around like 5 or 6, early elementary school, kindergarten or whatever. And I think it was a very good book, especially back then. Like, it's hard to get a kid motivated, but it's really surprisingly motivating for a child's book. Like, even now, if I read it, it just inspires me. He's kind of like talking about how the world's open to you and how you can do anything you want to be. And that's really good to hear when you're a child, because the world really is open to you when you're younger. And even when you're older, I guess, but mostly when you're a kid. So this is my favorite quote from it. Kid, you'll move mountains. So be your name Buxbaum or Bixby or Bray or Mordecai Allen, Alley Van Allen O'Shea. You're off to great places. Today is your day. Your mountain is waiting, so get on your way. And see, that's just very inspirational. Even now when I read it, it just inspires me to move mountains, and my mountain is waiting. So I just thought it was a very good book, especially back then. And all of Dr. Seuss books I really read when I was a kid, and they're all very inspirational. And it just kind of affected me back then, because it kind of reminded me that the world is open to me. I had a big imagination when I was a kid. Like, just all these different career paths, and just, the world's open to me. I haven't really done much yet, but you can really do whatever you want. So I really like the book, and it's definitely one of my favorite books of all time, especially in the children's book category. The second book on my list is Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, which is actually the second book in the 7-book series. And the reason why I picked the second one is I don't really remember reading the first one. I read it, but the second one is really when I just read it straight through. The first one, it took me a while, because I was like 7, and I read this one when I was 10, and it just really stuck with me because it was the first real book I read. It was a very thick book too. That just made me feel good about myself that I was able to read that much. And it kind of was also my first book series, and it got me into fantasy books. It was just really good, especially at that age. I was just really surprised that I could read and I could enjoy it. And my first novel is good. Which also leads me to my third book, which is their book series, which is Lord of the Rings. And another fantasy series, really good. Started off reading Hobbit, and I read, the 3 books in the Lord of the Rings series. And the book I chose is The Return of the King, and that's because it was the last one, and really it just kind of stuck with me because I really left me wanting more out of J.R.R. Tolkien, and I found that he was dead, and that really made me sad because he was a really good writer, and I just really enjoyed reading Lord of the Rings and The Return of the King. It just really, the imagery he put, I think is probably some of the best I've ever read, even now, because I was able to imagine in my head everything. And I think the movies were actually really good too. They did them justice. I mean, the books were, more fun to read because it's just your imagination, but the movies are really good. And it was also infected me because it's probably one of the first times I was able to use my imagination to imagine every single piece of imagery in there. I just played it out of my head as I was reading it. And that really started a trend, because now I do that, and it really helps me understand books now. I could read books and I could just imagine things in my head, and it really helps me to remember everything and keep track of the characters and the plot and everything. If I give them a face and a background, So yeah, it definitely helped me out later in life when I was reading books. And number 4 on my list is actually an art piece. It is a Sunday afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte by Georges Pierre Seurat. And I picked this because I really saw it for the first time in middle school, and I really enjoyed seeing it. I was just like, wow, this is really good. Like, just the style of painting and the depth and everything he used to kind of make it. And the reason it stuck with me is because it was the first time I realized that I'm not going to be an artist. Because I was like, I could never do that. I was in art drawing class. I couldn't draw. And it also, we were assigned to look at the backstory of each, or make up a backstory for each of the people, or 3 of the people that just we wanted to pick by the river, and kind of make up a backstory for each of them and analyze it. So that just really also helped my analyzation skills, and it really made me start to look at art more as, something that you can look more than just looking at it. Yeah, you can take it apart and try to see what the artist is trying to do with it. That really stuck with me, and I just really think it's a really beautiful painting as well. Number 5 on my list is the book Night by Elie Wiesel. It was written about him living in a Germany, Nazi Germany, as a Jew. And he was a young child the story's about him as a young child, and it was very vivid and everything. It's just left, we didn't really leave much out, because he just went how he got separated from his mom and his sister, and his father died while he was with him in concentration camp. So that really stuck with me, because it was just really showed the horrors of the Holocaust, and I had never really thought about it much before then. I read this when I was younger, so I knew about it, but I never actually thought about the horrors of the Holocaust, and this really brought it to life for me, and I just really enjoyed reading it because it was very vivid. It had a lot of imagery, and one of my quotes that I've pulled out from it was, "Never shall I forget those moments which murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams to dust. Never shall I forget these things, even if I am condemned to live as God, as long as God himself, never." It really just showed the anger he felt while being in the concentration camps. So much of it is psychological. It was just really, it just really brought you in the way he wrote it. It was very well written, very interesting story, and that's one of the reasons why I liked it a lot. And it was very good to analyze it and just look at how he lived back in those times. Very good image of Nazi Germany. Number 6 is a song by Radiohead. It's called Paranoid Android. The reason I picked it is not because it's my favorite song necessarily, but it's probably one of the first songs that I ever listened to and just tried to pick apart and just analyze what it really means, because clearly it's just a lot of different things going on in the song. It's a beautiful song, but there's just so many different things, so many different stories and lyrics that just is kind of hard to just take as it is. So this also helped. It was important to me because it was one of the first times that I analyzed songs, and it really got me into music and analyzing songs and looking at them deeper than what they actually were. And one of my favorite parts from it is When I am king, you will be first against the wall, with your opinion, which is of no consequence at all. What's that? I may be paranoid, but no android. What's that? I may be paranoid, but no android. And yeah, just so many different images in it, so many different cultural references, different metaphors. It's just really a beautiful song. You could take forever to pick it apart, but you could never really get what he's saying. I just thought that was really cool, and it led me to start to look at other songs after the fact, even to till today, and just look at music differently, analyze it, and it really got me into music. So number 7 is another book. It's called The Stranger by Albert Camus. It's originally written in French, and it's just about this guy that's just angry at the world. Not really angry. He's indifferent towards the world. And he just has no feelings. Like, the plot is just like his mother dies. People think he's crazy. He kills someone. He doesn't really care about that either. He has like no real emotions throughout the book. And I just found it so strange that someone would write about this. And it was also one of the first books I read in high school, because I had really stopped reading at that point, and it just kind of brought me back into it, because I just picked it up and it was really small, so I was like, I might as well read it. And it really, like, I had to read it twice because it was just so dense with all this imagery and symbolism, and like, you just pull apart anything. It's just a really well written book, and it's just him like being introspective the whole time. Like, it's just a glimpse into this mind of this guy who just doesn't care. He's just indifferent towards the world. And one of my favorite quotes is towards the end, where it said, "As if that blind rage has washed me clean, rid me of hope. For the first time, I that night alive with signs and stars, I opened myself to the gentle indifference of the world, finding it so much like myself, so like a brother, really. I felt that I had been happy and that I was happy again, for everything to be consummated, for me to feel less alone. I had only the wish that there be a large crowd of spectators the day of my execution, that they greet me with cries of hate." This is like really the climax of the story, where he's sitting there in jail waiting to be killed for the death penalty for killing that guy. And he just finds out that the world's indifferent. I'm indifferent. Nothing really. No one really cares about you. Not in such a depressing sense, but it's just the world is so much more than that. And he just kind of comes to that conclusion. It's really interesting the way he feels, like the way he comes to it. And I think it was a very good book, and kind of affected me, because I read it and I was like, wow, this is probably one of the first times I've ever read a book, and it was just came out to me. It was like with something so meta, like so introspective, and I was like, really, it led me to be more introspective and just think about like how the universe is working, how everything works, and not just take things as they are. That really is one of my favorite books of all time, actually. Little novels. And number 8 on my list is a book of poems, and this one is 100 Sonnets of Love by Pablo Neruda, which was originally written in Spanish and translated to English. And I had the version where it was Spanish and then English, the same, so they had them side by side. And I'm fluent in Spanish, so I was able to read the Spanish one and then read the English one and see what differences there were. And I really like the way that it translated. They translated it pretty well, I think. And it just really got me into poetry. I read it around sometime in high school. I wasn't really much of a poetry guy, but I really enjoyed reading it. Like, just pulling out random poems from it and just reading it. Especially the fact that he wrote them in, like, sonnet form. Because I didn't really know what a sonnet was, but I found out later. And just interesting that someone made sonnets in Spanish. It kind of affected me and definitely opened my eyes to more poetry. That led me to read other poetry works, so others of his and other people's and other authors. So I really enjoyed reading it. Number 9 on my list is Aragon by Christopher Paolini. This is the first of a trilogy of books. And I read this in high school when I hadn't really read fantasy books for a long time, since like Lord of the Rings. And I was really into fantasy before, but this is like the first time I had read a fantasy book. And I just thought it was really good. Like, it was just really caught my eye, and I just kind of picked it up, and just from there I read it in like a week. It's a really big book, and it just wowed me, the way it was written and just the imagery of it. It was beautifully written. Like, just, I mean, the movie really was bad, like really bad. I didn't know justice at all, but the book is really good, and I read the rest of the trilogy and definitely didn't disappoint me. So this is important because it kind of brought me back into that whole reading, for like the fun of reading. I think it was like one of the first times in high school I just read for the fun of it. It wasn't assigned to me or anything, and it just opened my eyes back up to fantasy books and more just good books in general. And the last book on my list is The Unforgiving Minute by Craig Mullaney. And this is probably one of the most important ones, because it actually kind of led to my decision of actually coming to West Point. It affected a major decision, because I didn't actually hear about this until I had already applied. And my friend was telling me about it because he knew I was applying. He was like, "Yeah, it's a really good book about some guy from West Point wrote it." And I was like, "All right." Picked it up, and I was really surprised. Like, this book is probably one of the main reasons why I came to West Point. It was very good, very well written. It showed his life from before West Point, at West Point, after West Point, being an Army officer and everything. And he just had a very interesting life. And the way he wrote it was also very interesting. And just the way it just affected me so much, because it really inspired me to come here. I feel that I was on the fence before about it because I wasn't so sure about West Point. I heard a lot of stories about it, but the reading this made me want to come here. It was definitely a big part in my decision to come here. So I feel like this is probably one of the more important books, more recently read. Like, I read it like a year ago, and it was very good, and I would recommend it to anyone who would want to come in. So yeah, those are my 10 books that affected my life, and 10 books in my literary autobiography.